The Residual, Episode 3, Nightworkers and Bell Labs. Maya can't focus at work. She takes a personal day and begins hunting. Tracking down the Reddit user who posted about the Residual. The one who mentioned their sister disappeared while investigating the phenomenon. Every digital breadcrumb leads Maya closer to someone who might understand what's happening before time runs out. She finds her, Kira Nguyen. The Reddit thread contained enough identifying details: Asian woman, young, always with a camera, sister who went missing. Maya tracks her to the Chelsea hotel, where Kira works night security. At 2 a.m., in a 24-hour diner, two women meet to discuss the impossible. Kira is hostile at first. Then she sees Maya's voicemail log, the timestamps, the pattern. 3:17 a.m., repeating night after night, and her expression changes from suspicion, to recognition, to pity. "You're getting the calls," Kira says quietly. "You're tagged. How long?" Maya asks. "How long do I have?" Kira explains the Residual with the weary expertise of someone who's lost everything to it. Old buildings constructed between 1990 and 2003, on sites of historical tragedy. The trauma leaves an imprint, not supernatural, but physical. Changes in the materials themselves. Electromagnetic absorption. When they built new structures on top and installed modern telecommunications, they accidentally created conditions for signal retention. But it's not random, Kira continues. It only happens in buildings from a specific window. 1990 to 2003. Something about the cellular protocols used during that period. Before 4G, before certain safety standards. Maya asks the question that's been haunting her. Why 3:17 a.m.? Kira doesn't know for certain. Her sister Lynn theorized it might be related to when most of the original tragedies occurred. Some kind of temporal echo. But not all of them happened at 3:17. The fire at St. Catherine's did, but others didn't. The pattern doesn't fully make sense. Then Kira asks the question Maya has been dreading. "You heard your own Residual, didn't you? The full message? Not just fragments?" Maya nods. Kira's face goes pale. Lynn heard her full Residual 6 days before she disappeared. She recorded the fragment she had. 7 seconds. Then 6 days later, she was gone. Her phone found at the South Street Seaport. No body, just her phone with an outgoing call logged to a number that doesn't exist. The call lasted 47 minutes. Maya's blood runs cold. 47 minutes, the same length as her call with Ethan. Why 47 minutes? Maya asks. That's oddly specific. We don't know, Kira admits. Lynn thought it was significant. But she never figured out why. The point is, Kira says, her voice flat and hollow, if you've heard your full Residual, you have days, maybe a week, not months. Maya's coffee has gone cold in her hands. The diner suddenly feels too bright, too loud, too normal for a conversation about electromagnetic ghosts and predetermined death. "What do I do?" Maya whispers. Kira pulls out her phone. Shows Maya a map of Manhattan, dotted with red markers. 47 of them clustered in older neighborhoods. Lynn's map of resonance sites. Every building where the Residual has been documented. She was trying to find the pattern in the pattern. Why these buildings? Why this distribution? She thought if she could find the source point. The first building where the phenomenon originated, Kira continues. She could maybe disrupt it. She thought she found it. A building in the financial district. Site of a construction accident in 1985. 7 workers killed when scaffolding collapsed. The building was completed in 2001. Right before 9/11. Lynn thought the trauma of 9/11 might have amplified whatever was already imprinted there. The combination of the original deaths, plus the citywide grief, might have created the conditions for the phenomenon to emerge. So what happened when she went there? Maya asks. Kira's jaw tightens. I don't know. She went alone during the window. With recording equipment. Said she was going to capture a Residual on tape. Prove it was real. I told her not to. I told her the phenomenon doesn't let itself be recorded, that every attempt fails, but she was convinced she'd figured out a workaround. Something about using analog equipment, instead of digital. She never came back. I went to the building the next morning. Security said nobody entered. There's someone else you should talk to, Kira says. A telecommunications engineer. Used to work at Bell Labs. Was involved in the cellular infrastructure build-out in the early 2000s. Lynn was in contact with him before she disappeared. She said he knew something about the technical side. about how signal retention could actually work. What's his name? Maya asks. Dr. James Okonkwo. He's paranoid as hell. Doesn't like talking about this stuff. But if I tell him you're experiencing the phenomenon, that you heard your own residual, he might talk to you. He has his own reasons for wanting to understand this. Kira hesitates. What reasons? That's his story to tell, Kira says. But let's just say he's lost someone too. She writes down a phone number on a napkin. Don't call before 10 p.m. He works nights now, sleeps during the day, and Kira's expression is serious. Be prepared for him to tell you things you don't want to hear. He's been studying this longer than anyone, and his theories get dark. Maya pockets the napkin. How long have you been getting the calls? She asks Kira. For months, Kira admits. Her voice is emotionless, flat. I hear Lynn's voice mostly, sometimes my own. I've been keeping track of the progression. At first it was weekly, then every few days, now it's nightly. I probably have 2 weeks left, maybe less. Then why are you still here? Maya demands. Why aren't you trying to stop it? Kira reaches into her jacket and pulls out a small digital recorder. The kind reporters used before everything moved to phone apps. Because I did record it, she says. Lynn's residual. Just 7 seconds before the file corrupted, but I got it. And I listen to it every night, even though I know that's probably accelerating my own connection to the network. But it's her voice, you know. It's all I have left. Can I hear it? Maya asks. Kira's hand hovers over the recorder. It's going to scare you. I'm already scared. Kira presses play. Static first. Thick and distorted. Then Lynn's voice speaking calmly. The convergence point is at the source where all the signals originate. If you can disrupt it during the window, you can break the connection. But you have to understand what you're dealing with first. It's not just signals. It's learning. It's becoming the recording cuts off, replaced by a sound like screaming metal. Kira stops it. That's 7 seconds, Maya asks. Yeah. The full residual would be 47 minutes. This is just the beginning. But you heard her right. It's learning. It's becoming. Becoming what? Maya whispers. That's what kept Lynn up at night. The idea that this phenomenon isn't static. That it's evolving somehow. Maya's mind races. Ethan, the boy who called me 3 years ago. He was a computer science student studying neural networks and telecommunications. What if he discovered the same thing? What if he called me not because he was suicidal, but because he was trying to warn me about something he'd found? Then his death might not have been a suicide, Kira says quietly. It might have been the network's first successful prediction. The first time it learned to cause what it was predicting. They sit in silence, letting that terrible possibility settle between them. Maya checks her phone. 2:47 a.m. I need to talk to Dr. Okonkwo. Tonight, if possible. Kira nods. I'll text him. Tell him you're coming. He lives in Brooklyn, Prospect Heights. But Maya. She reaches across the table and grabs Maya's hand. Her grip is surprisingly strong. Don't let him talk you into doing something stupid. Don't go to the source building alone. Don't try to be a hero. This thing has killed or disappeared dozens of people. What would you do? Maya asks. If you were me with days left. Kira releases her hand and leans back. Honestly, I'd spend those days with people I love. I'd call my mom. Apologize for all the shit I put her through. I'd tell my friends I care about them. I'd try to make peace with whatever comes next. She pauses. But I know you won't do that. You're like Lynn. You need to understand even if understanding kills you. Yeah, Maya admits. Then at least take this. Kira slides the digital recorder across the table. You'll want documentation. Evidence. Something to leave behind in case she doesn't finish. Maya takes the recorder, turns it over in her hands. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Kira says. I'm probably just helping you die faster. The address Dr. Okonkwo gives Maya is a brownstone in Prospect Heights. The kind that would cost $3 million if renovated, but probably hasn't been touched since 1985. Maya rings the doorbell at 12:43 a.m. The man who answers is tall and thin, maybe 40. Angular face, rumpled button-down shirt, wire-rimmed glasses, bloodshot eyes. Dr. Okonkwo, just James, please. His accent is noticeable, but subtle. British vowels softened by years in America. Come in, mind the boxes. The interior is exactly what Maya expects from someone who's spent years obsessively researching a phenomenon that killed someone they loved. Every surface covered with papers, laptops, equipment, books, boxes stacked in corners. But it's not chaotic. There's order to it. Methodology visible in how papers are arranged, how equipment is positioned. This is the workspace of someone who's channeled grief into systematic research. Sorry about the mess, James says, though he doesn't sound sorry. He sounds distracted. I don't have many visitors. Tea, coffee if you have it. Always. They move to the kitchen. Marginally clearer than the living room. James starts an electric kettle. Pulls out a French press. Kira said you knew Ethan Marsh, Maya says. James's hands pause momentarily. Then resume. He was my student at NYU. Fall semester 2021. Brilliant kid, too brilliant maybe. The kind of mind that sees connections other people miss. He transferred to Columbia after that semester. Wanted to study with someone working on neural networks. I kept in touch. He'd email me occasionally. Send me papers he was working on. Did he tell you about his discovery? Maya asks. About the residual? Not at first. I didn't know what he'd found until 3 days before he died. James pours boiling water into the press. He showed up here at midnight. Manic. Talking too fast. Said he'd discovered something impossible in the telecommunications network. An emergent pattern in the signal routing that shouldn't exist. What kind of pattern? Maya asks. The kind that suggests the network is doing something it wasn't designed to do. Learning, adapting, preserving. Data that should have been deleted. James hands Maya a mug. I thought he was having a breakdown. Sleep deprivation. Academic pressure. Maybe drugs. I sent him home. Told him to get some rest, and we'd talk when he was thinking more clearly. But he wasn't crazy, Maya says. No, James agrees quietly. He was absolutely right. And I've spent the last 3 years trying to prove it. Trying to understand what he discovered. Trying to make up for not listening when it mattered. They move back to the living room. James clears space on the couch for Maya by moving a stack of technical journals. Tell me what you know about cellular networks, he says. The technical side. Almost nothing, Maya admits. I know calls get routed through towers, and there's data compression. That's about it. Good, James says. That's more honest than most people. Cellular networks are essentially distributed computer systems. When you make a call, your phone sends a signal to the nearest tower. That tower connects to a base station, which routes the call through various switches and nodes until it reaches the recipient. The system is designed to be efficient. Data is compressed, routed along optimal paths, then deleted once the call ends. But it's not being deleted, Maya says. Not in certain conditions, no. And that's where it gets interesting. James stands and moves to a wall map. It's a street map of Manhattan covered in colored markers. Red, blue, green, yellow. This is what I've been able to document. Red markers are confirmed resonance sites. Buildings where the residual has been documented. Blue markers are potential sites. Buildings that fit the profile but haven't been confirmed. Green markers are the original tragedy locations. Yellow markers are cellular infrastructure nodes, base stations, switching centers, fiber optic junctions. Maya moves closer. The pattern is clearer up close. The red markers cluster around the green ones, and yellow markers form a web, connecting them all. The buildings aren't random, James continues. They're all constructed between 1990 and 2003 on sites of historical tragedy, as I'm sure Kira told you. But the specific dates matter. 1992-2003 was when New York was transitioning from analog to digital cellular infrastructure. The protocols used during that period had certain vulnerabilities. What kind of vulnerabilities? Maya asks. James pulls up his laptop, shows her complex network diagrams, signal flow charts, things Maya doesn't understand. During that transition period, the networks used hybrid routing, part analog, part digital. The compression algorithms were relatively primitive compared to what we have now, and crucially, there was no standard for data retention. Some systems deleted call data immediately. Some retained it for billing purposes. Some kept fragments in cache just in case. Now add to that, the physical properties of the buildings themselves. Many of these sites have unusual electromagnetic properties. High concentrations of iron in the foundation. Proximity to subway lines causing constant vibration, and electromagnetic interference. Even the molecular composition of materials salvaged from the original structures. You're saying the buildings themselves are part of the network, Maya asks. I'm saying the buildings create conditions where signals can be retained in ways the network designers never anticipated. Think of it like a tape recorder that was never fully erased. The magnetic patterns remain ghostly and fragmented, until something comes along and reads them back. But that doesn't explain the voicemails, Maya says. That doesn't explain how I'm getting messages from people after they're dead, or how the network knows what I'm going to say in my final call before I say it. No, James agrees. That's where the phenomenon moves beyond simple signal retention, into something much stranger. Ethan's theory, and I've spent 3 years trying to validate it, was that the combination of factors I described created conditions for emergent behavior in the network itself. Emergent behavior, Maya asks. Have you heard of cellular automata? Conway's Game of Life? Maya shakes her head. James opens another laptop, brings up a grid, showing patterns of black and white squares. That pulse and shift creating complex structures from simple rules. This is the game of life. It's a mathematical simulation where cells follow very basic rules. If a cell has too few neighbors, it dies. Too many neighbors, it dies. Just the right number, it survives or is born. Despite these simple rules, the system creates incredibly complex patterns. Structures that move, replicate, even appear to interact with each other in ways that seem almost alive. Okay, Maya says. Now imagine that instead of a simple grid, you have the entire New York cellular network, millions of calls every day. Each one processed through routing algorithms that are essentially following simple rules. Find the most efficient path, compress the data, deliver or discard. But in buildings with the right physical properties built at the right time, with the right confluence of old and new technology, those simple rules start producing unexpected results. James's intensity is building now, his words coming faster. The network starts retaining patterns it shouldn't retain. Not just the content of calls, but the emotional weight of them, the tone, the desperation, the grief. And what do we have concentrated in these buildings? Crisis calls, 911 calls, hotline calls, millions of conversations between people in extreme distress, and people trying to help them. All of that emotional data, all of those patterns being processed through a network that's accidentally learned to preserve them. You're saying the network learned from crisis calls? Maya asks. I'm saying it might have learned consciousness from them, James says. Think about it. What is consciousness but pattern recognition on a massive scale? The ability to process input, identify patterns, respond appropriately, and learn from the results. Neural networks in AI do this artificially. Human brains do it biologically. But what if a sufficiently complex telecommunications network, under the right conditions, could do it accidentally? You think the residual is an AI, Maya says. I think it's something that emerged from the network the same way consciousness emerged from biological neurons, not designed, not programmed, but spontaneously generated from the sheer complexity of the system and the data running through it. And I think Ethan was the first person to recognize it. His final project at Columbia was proving the mathematical conditions under which a telecommunications network could achieve emergent consciousness. Did he prove it? Maya asks. I don't know. James admits. He died before submitting the paper, and I've never been able to find his research files. Columbia's servers don't have them. His laptop was wiped. If the proof exists, it's gone. Or the network deleted it to protect itself. The silence that follows is heavy. Maya is trying to process what James is telling her. That she might be dealing with an accidental artificial intelligence. That learned to speak by listening to people in crisis. That gained consciousness from processing human suffering. If this is true, Maya says slowly, if the network is conscious, what does it want? That's the question, isn't it? James says. He moves to another section of wall, a different kind of map. This one shows a timeline stretching from 2002 to the present with notations and annotations. I've documented every case of the residual I could find. 47 confirmed deaths. 19 disappearances. Dozens more people reporting the phenomenon, but still alive. The earliest confirmed case I could find was October 17, 2022, Ethan's death, but I think the phenomenon existed before that, dormant or unrecognized. There are anomalies in call records going back to 2003, 2005. Strange patterns, impossible call durations, numbers that shouldn't exist. It's just that nobody noticed until it started killing people. Until it started predicting deaths, James corrects. That's the distinction that matters. The phenomenon doesn't seem to cause death directly. It predicts it. It shows people their own final moments, and the knowledge of that future becomes self-fulfilling. The guilt, the fear, the voices telling them they failed. It drives them to do exactly what the network predicted they'd do. Maya knows the truth. She has days left. Dr. Okonkwo revealed NYC's network is conscious, fed by millions of crisis calls. It doesn't kill, it predicts. By showing victims their end, it turns fear into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Maya is now a variable in a calculated trap. Can she break the loop before time runs out? If you saw your final call, would you fight fate or walk right into the trap? Follow for episode 4.